Mic off.
Excellent. Good evening. My name is Richard Corey. I'm the director of the VEMI lab, and welcome to a roundtable discussion about autonomous vehicles. This is a part of Maine Impact Week here at the University of Maine, and we're very happy to get involved in
Mic off.
helping out and talking about AI and autonomous vehicles and where things are going. Tonight, I'm joined by 5 panelists, and we're going to have a nice roundtable discussion, all from different diverse backgrounds. We have my longtime colleague, Nicholas Giudici, who is the Chief Research Scientist at the VEMI Lab and Professor in Spatial Informatics. We're joined by Catherine Freund, who's the founder and president of the ITN America. Jonathan Rubin, who's the director of Margaret Chase Smith Policy Center. Dale Peabody, who's transportation research engineer at the Maine Department of Transportation. And Eric Dibner, who's the Maine State ADA Accessibility Coordinator. So we have some quite a diverse group here. We do have comments on YouTube Live, anybody watching, if you have questions. We also have one of our grad students on there to answer the shorter questions that, we don't really have time to get into here, but certainly please put them in. We'll get to whatever questions we can with the group, but we're going to just start off if everybody's ready to go. And I will start right off with a simple question of how are AVs going to change life in Maine as we know it? And that's kind of an open-ended question, but I'll just, I'll leave it in there and I'll leave it to you folks. Anybody have a thought on that?
I don't mind starting. Thank you, Rick. A couple things that we think about at Maine DOT, safety is paramount. One of our missions is to keep the public safe, the traveling public safe. There's a real high potential of this technology, improving safety. It can take some of the driver error out of the equation. One of our biggest safety problems here, challenges, is lane departures, and this technology could certainly help keep people in the lanes, and that's crossing the center line or actually going off the road, those types of things. That's a huge tremendous impact for us. And also looking at mobility, we think it could improve mobility, where vehicles like on the interstate, they could have less headway, they could travel closer together. And there's also some potential savings in fuel, because in some respects, you'll be drafting off each other. You'll be close and be able to gain that fuel efficiency. So just a couple quick thoughts I have on the topic.
Do you think, and actually this kind of falls right into Jonathan's wheelhouse, but we're talking about fuel savings with what it looks to be projected, a lot of these cars being electric. And I know that Governor Mills just announced a big electric push moving forward. Is that going to help with fuel savings and, environmental impact in that?
Well, to the extent that these vehicles become electric, and that's what we expect, any electric vehicles in the state of Maine will make a huge difference in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We have a very clean electrical grid. And electric motors are much more efficient than internal combustion motors. So that is all a positive. So that's wonderful. Rick, if you don't mind, I'd like to address your first question, though.
Sure.
What would it mean to the state of Maine? And you said, let's think about going forward. The pandemic has made a huge change the way we live and work and travel today. And I think that it's reasonable that the autonomous vehicles are going to have a huge impact, same size impact on where we choose to live and work and travel. If you think about vehicles, part of the cost is the cost of gasoline or the cost of electricity to drive it, the cost of the vehicle, the cost of insurance, but a huge part of that is time cost. And it's your personal time in the vehicle. To the extent that these vehicles allow people to use that time in other ways that they would rather do, work, snooze, talk to a friend, that effectively lowers the cost of time. And that's one of the biggest costs in getting around in passenger vehicles or trains or planes, what have you. So I think that this has a profound implications for the settlement patterns and work patterns in Maine.
No, I agree with you there. One of the questions that just came in is how, I'm going to read this, how quality and availability of public transport will change with autonomous vehicles. And I think I think we can speak to the people that currently don't have access to vehicles, but anybody have any thoughts on that?
I mean, one of the challenges for Maine is that it's just a very, there's a lot of people that are, there aren't a ton of people, but the people that we have are very spread out. So you have this kind of geographically dispersed population. And so the transportation networks are focused in a couple of areas, a couple of cities, Portland, greater Portland area, Bangor area, and a few other places. And so it can be very difficult for drivers to get from place to place, but also people that don't drive. And I think we're going to get into one of the questions, certainly older drivers who may be at higher driving risk, people with disabilities, and any other people that use transport. So I think that if autonomous vehicles and the networks could be set up to help fill in some of the gaps of where current fixed transportation systems are not able to go, I think it could really open the door for new people living in new areas. As Jonathan said, I think people are already moving to Maine. If we look at our awful housing market from the standpoint of someone trying to buy a house, there's a lot of people moving here. There's a lot of people moving to different parts of the state. And the more that we can have new types of technology networks, transportation networks to facilitate moving people around, the better. And I think this will definitely be a benefit to that.
What about things, I mean, we're talking about transportation, moving people around. What about things like we have the largest number of seniors, in this state. How is it going to affect their lives? Maybe this falls into Catherine's category a little more.
Yeah, thanks. I think it has really good promise for helping older people. I think it's going to diminish the use of traditional mass transportation, autonomous vehicles. And if people are worried about sprawl now, just wait until you don't have to put your hands on the steering wheel to get anywhere, and you can read a book or do your homework while you're traveling. So I think that's going to be a very big change. The reasons for people to, I'm kind of giving you a combined answer here, but the reasons for people to live in high density population patterns are going to diminish, because that is a lot for shopping and for work. And you don't have to go to a store to shop now, and you don't have to go to an office to work now. And if you add to that, you don't have to steer the vehicle to travel now. Land use patterns are going to change dramatically over a number of years. As far as older people using autonomous vehicles, all of the studies so far show that older people could live without it. They're afraid of it, and they don't want to do it. Do I think they're going to do it? I absolutely think they're going to do it. I do. Technology has a kind of a slow uptake, and especially, I don't know if this is an official category, but I divide technology into passive and active uses. So program your VCR, nobody's going to do that. That's too complicated. But, have an MRI, that's pretty fancy technology. That's easy. You just lay down and you do it. So autonomous vehicles, I think if they get over being afraid of them, if they get in and they just have to sit down, they're going to do it. I know we have a program where people can trade their car to pay for their rides. And everybody told me, you know, nobody's going to do that because everybody loves their car. And my response has always been, yeah, I'm sure they do, but I think I know what they love more, and that's freedom. And people do trade their cars when they can no longer drive them to pay for rides. And I think the same thing is going to happen with autonomous vehicles. They're afraid of it, but then they're going to try it. And gee, it's nice to be able to go somewhere and not ask a favor. And so I think they're going to do it because freedom just about overrides everything. But I do think this, that for older people, and I think it's a mistake to lump together people with disabilities and older people. They have different kinds of needs. Very older people who are frail are weak. They can't carry packages.
Catherine, your mic has got quiet all of a sudden. Just
Can you hear me now?
Yep, I can.
Yeah.
There you go. Sorry about
Okay,
that.
I'm sorry. No, what I was saying was that older people, you lose muscle mass and you become weaker, and you know, they can push the cart down the aisle at the supermarket, but they can't heft the packages into their house. And they, you know what I like to say, that the qualities that make you a good Supreme Court justice don't necessarily make you mobile and able to drive. So, you know,
that's a good point.
people can think well at any age, but it doesn't mean that they can fold their own walker and so on and so on. So I think there's a really important role, and this is like a great research topic, for the role of human assistance and human interaction for certain populations with autonomous vehicles. Last thing I'll say is, if you give an older person a volunteer to go with them and help them, I'll bet you anything they use an autonomous vehicle.
I hope that's not the last thing you say, Catherine. I like that we moved it along. But you bring up a good point. I mean, when it comes to fear and trust, and I'll serve this one to you, Eric, is the fear of this new technology, in which I think we kind of generally know that it's going to be a safer mechanism. Is that fear an accessibility issue?
Well, that's interesting. I don't think the fear is an accessibility issue. It's the normal reaction to something new. It's
Yeah, and oh, go ahead. Sorry.
You will tell me if my signal poops out while I'm talking. Wave at me or something. The clue about making the autonomous vehicle less fearsome is making it accessible. If all the technology is in hand and you feel like you're in control, even if it's driving itself, you can stop it, you can give it a command, you can have it play music for you, whatever, then I think the fear is much less an issue. People have fear about getting on the bus, you know?
Yeah, no, they do. And it's interesting because for me, I've been saying this for a while about autonomous vehicles. We're moving from vehicles being a tool to being a utility. And, you know, I mean, none of us were alive, but I'm sure there was a pretty big fear of electricity from what I read when it was coming out. And I'm wondering if that fear, and maybe this is a good one for Nick, is I'm wondering if that fear is going to be something that's going to have to be addressed, or is it going to naturally just fall in, like Catherine's point? I mean, once it becomes a freedom issue, is it going to naturally just fall in order?
Well, there's a bunch of issues that are connected here. We talk about independence with older adults, with disabled people, and really with anyone. Transportation is a huge deal. Fear around anything new. But I think what a lot of this comes down to, you know, all the research, no matter what group you look at, people say, oh, I like the concept of autonomous vehicles. Would you get into one? Oh, I don't know. I don't trust that. And so there's a huge trust gap, which needs to be solved. And this is true with most new technologies. You know, and in one of the areas that we're looking at in research in the lab is this idea of human vehicle collaboration, looking at how one way to solve the trust gap is to make the unknown known, and to make what's happening not only so people understand it, but so they feel like they can interact with it. So when you have a new group of people that get together, a way to build collaboration in teams is to build trust, to build an understanding, to build a way of knowing that if I need something, I can ask Catherine, and if Catherine needs something, she can feel comfortable asking me, and what have you. And so I think what we have this problem of what is, being called now collaborative intelligence. You have a human intelligence, you have an artificial intelligence. And neither of us are really good at talking to each other. I mean, it's hard enough to get your Alexa to even play the song you want, right? And that's just a personal, assistant that's here in the house. This isn't a life or death operation in a vehicle. And so I think for the trust part to change, which I think will trickle down to all the rest of these issues, we have to figure out a way for humans and AIs to communicate and interact and have more of a way to build collaboration. There may be other aspects of that. Do you need to imagine it being more anthropomorphic, more like a person? There's pros and cons to that. I don't know that answer, but I think that for AVs to really be accepted, we have to deal with trust. And I think that's going to be, how do we make these two intelligences feel more comfortable together?
No, I completely agree with that. Let me hit another YouTube question that just came in. I guess it's a combination of the questions that are coming in. What legislative or infrastructure changes need to happen, and how soon do they need to happen? Now, that's well outside of my jurisdiction. That's somebody else on this group.
Can we just say soon?
I can speak to that a little bit. We're currently looking at legislative and policies around things that would enable autonomous vehicles. And we have a New England effort, so we're working with the 5 other New England states. That's just starting off. So we're taking a deeper look into that. And I think everyone knows now, a vehicle has to have a licensed driver in it to operate. I mean, that's those are the rules now. So, but that's kind of on the legislative policy side. We're going to be taking a pretty deep dive into that. And hopefully there'll be some recommendations at the end of it that help the 6 New England states adopt policies and potentially legislation that will be consistent, across the border, because I don't think these autonomous vehicles care what state they're in. I mean, they might know because they're getting pings from GPS satellites and all that. But as far as infrastructure, I mean, we're talking about like traffic signals that we have out there now, and having controllers in there that would basically talk to the vehicles. So they would connect to the vehicles through basically, similar to Bluetooth technology, and also they might store data so that the vehicle could exchange data with that controller and then send it to another vehicle, that type of thing. And also, even more simplistic, what do we have to do with our, we go out and paint lines every year, and every winter they go away. How do we need to better maintain those lines so that the vehicles can see where they're going? Do they need that guidance? And you think about stop signs or any signs out there. I mean, do they have to have a certain, how well do they have to be maintained? Do they still need to be reflective? I mean, can the vehicles read those signs the way most humans can? And some of them do degrade. And you even think about sunlight on some signs that are hard to see at different times of day, and how do we overcome that? So those are some of the things, the questions we're asking now. We don't have the answers, and certainly the sooner the better. But obviously, we don't want to go out and invest a lot in the infrastructure, not knowing what exactly is needed. And I think there's kind of a catch-22 there right now, trying to determine what it is we need to do.
Yeah, it's tough. So a couple of things that are flying through. One, for anybody watching right now, Paul Fink is our grad student who's answering some of the in-house questions on the comments right now. So if people are wondering, who is this guy? He's our guy who's answering questions from the research that Nick and I have been working on over the years.
And he's also doing his PhD on autonomous vehicles.
That's right. So
he knows quite a bit about this. Yeah.
He's got quite a bit of knowledge in this area. The question that just came up in regards to that, Dale, was, is there kind of a difference between small towns and cities as far as infrastructure changes?
Well, Yeah, in some respects, yeah. Obviously the traffic signal piece, if you go through some of the more built up metropolitan areas, the Portlands and Bangors, you have many more traffic signals there. So the more those can be communicating with the vehicles and back and forth, the better the mobility will be through the city, and the safety as well. When you get out to some of the more rural towns, like I live in China, Maine. I mean, we have one traffic signal on Route 3, but so I think it becomes more maintaining, especially on the town roads, maintaining some level of striping or whatever it is that vehicle needs to keep itself on the road. We just need to better understand that so that we can make those investments in the infrastructure.
Dale, I have a question that you or maybe Eric might address. So one of the things you brought up is something we've been thinking about and has been being talked more and more about, just in the space of when we get to fully autonomous vehicles, where we're not talking about driving anymore. There's no longer a steering wheel, for instance. How will that impact these current rules, do you think, right now, in the sense that, right now you do need to have a driver's license? As a blind guy, I've always I've been interested in autonomous vehicles my whole life because I want a way to get around. And it always kind of seems sci-fi, and now where it's really not sci-fi, but the policy in some ways seems really behind, because it's silly to have to say you need to have a driver's license when manual control of a vehicle at some point isn't even going to be an option. How do you think that's going to play out?
Well, I wish I could answer your question with full confidence, but I certainly cannot. I mean, right now we do allow pilots, so we're starting, and it's been kind of quiet over the last year. I think Jonathan's been involved with some of that, but I think the technology, from what I understand, the technology in the vehicles isn't quite ready yet. So I don't think we're ready to see a vehicle with no brakes, no pedals in it, and no steering wheel. So I think there's time for the policies to catch up with that, unless there's going to be a huge explosion of that.
Well, the technology is definitely ahead of the policy.
Yeah. Oh, there's no doubt right now.
And that's absolutely the case.
Yeah, but I think the level 4 and level 5, if someone can correct me if I'm wrong, those are when you start to get to the fully automation.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm not sure. I think there's time for some policy to catch up to that, is what I'm saying.
Eric, you're muted if you're.
Definitely policies are an issue, but in my mind, thinking 20 years from now, the policies will come along and address the safety issues. And I think the big concern to me in the rollout over the next couple of decades is what are the economics of it? Who will own the vehicles? Will there be fleets of vehicles that are like taxis or Uber? And will there, obviously people could own their own vehicle, but it could change the shape of transportation, period. That there'll be hopefully lots of vehicles rolling on the roads that are owned by central ownership systems. And how that economic framework is established will help determine the availability and the freedom of people to come and go when they need to. As you've seen with programs like Uber, they kind of took the field, and then the rules had to come along later to try to control what they had created. And I'm definitely not saying let a bunch of vehicles loose on the road and see what happens. We want to eventually have a means for people to go where they need to go at a reasonable cost, whether they own the vehicle or not.
So Eric, first of all, I thank you for raising that really important point about the future in terms of, the jargon is mobility as a service. as opposed to private ownership of vehicles and private control over rides and where one goes. And different models and the economics of that, I think, really are fundamental social questions and political questions as well as private decisions on how our vehicles continue to be used in the same way. Currently, people buy vehicles for very emotional reasons, typically. They view themselves and project their self-image in the vehicle they drive, as well as it's functional, holds a cup of coffee and can take kids to soccer practice. But there are a lot of emotional reasons. And so there really is some questions that I don't think we know the answer to yet about how mobility is going to change and the ownership structure is going to change. I know Catherine has probably thought tons about this because she's a mobility person here. But I think you have absolutely the right question. What are the economics of this and how is it going to work out and what systems are going to be forward?
Catherine, I'd say it's to you now.
Yes. Well, I think any transportation mode that moves people, I think movement itself is a fundamental human need. I think Maslow missed it on his hierarchy. It's real fundamental stuff. Like plants are alive and they hold still, and animals are alive and they move. And so movement is really, really important to people. And, you know, I'm probably talking about psychological things I have no business talking about, but I think it's a fundamental need to move and to feel free and independent that makes people attach emotional feelings to transportation objects, and cars are the primo example. You know, people, you know, I in school was an English major, so I know what symbols are. They're concrete objects that represent abstract theory or thinking or feelings. And cars represent independence to people because it helps them come and go whenever they feel like it. I personally do not emotionally connect myself with machines of any kind. And I just regard cars as great big machines. But I realize I am in a very small minority. And as Jonathan said, people really identify with these vehicles. And I think, you know, that has to be taken into consideration.
Doesn't that put the mobility as a service model that most of the autonomous vehicle manufacturers and people are talking about kind of at odds with the human perception, the human kind of nature that we're talking about now? Like we're gonna have.
Well, I was pleased to hear Jonathan use the word jargon. You know, mobility as a service, mobility on demand. Those are the phrases du jour. You know. And they'll come and they'll go, I think, but fundamental human behavior will prevail. And I actually don't think it is people's love of cars that makes them so prominent. I think it is the economic impact on the steel industry and the energy industry, and you know, the pushes of these are huge sectors of the economy, huge. You know, so I don't know what it's going to take to change that. Things do come along that change very dominant patterns, things like pandemics, like overnight change things. So it's kind of hard to know in the end what's going to happen and what's going to change things. I know technology is a huge motivator. It really changes the economy. It changes things. I'll give you, you know, have you all heard the story of the transportation planner out in Kansas City, I believe it was, around the turn of the last century, where he was asked to plan for growth for the city. And he planned how many hayfields would be necessary to feed the horses. And he planned how many carts would be necessary to move the manure out of the central city. And he did this whole elaborate plan of horses and carriages, and then the automobile was invented. And that was the end of that. You know, technology really, really, really does change things. And I think autonomous vehicles are going to really, really, really change things. I think that's going to happen. And I think that policy, I think technology always leads policy. I don't think there were any speed limits or licenses when people started rolling around in automobiles, you know, and I think they had to figure it out. And I think they had to figure out how do you make the roads and how do you make the stop signs. And I think there were a lot of crashes before that happened. So, so that was technology that did that, not public policy. Public policy came trotting behind. But of course, you have to be thinking about it all the time in order to trot behind with any kind of credibility.
And still, with all the laws, there are lots of crashes.
And still, there are lots of crashes. The other thing I was thinking, you know, there's a lot of theories about what's going to happen. If you remember the spiel is the word I want to use, that Uber and Lyft use about how they were going to reduce congestion and reduce air pollution. Remember that stuff?
Mm.
Guess what happened? Gridlock. Air pollution went up like crazy. You know, it just wasn't what people thought it would be. And I suspect we're going to be dealing with some of this stuff with the autonomous vehicles, that we're just not going to know what's going to happen until human nature interacts with the technology, and then public policy tries to figure out what to do with it after it happens.
Well, Catherine, thank you for that perspective. Let me try to be slightly more optimistic here.
I wasn't being negative.
No,
Was
no,
I?
no, we didn't think so.
Masters of our fate. I think we know that we see the change. We see what is going to happen, and you know, at the risk of a little prognostication, I think the market's going to continue to bifurcate and fragment. And there's some portion of the population will have their private autonomous vehicle and will never share, and some are going to be more open. And I think what we need to ask is what outcomes do we want, and how do we get a regulatory framework now such that it's easier to get in changes before we get entrenched interests. I think that's the important policy challenge we have ahead of us. If we want to make sure that the disabled and the elderly, of which I'm rapidly getting there, have access, we have to think about what type of structure is going to make mobility available for me 20 years from now, 10 years from now.
I'm not saying that isn't a wonderful thing to do and a good thing to happen. It's just that technology or public policy doesn't create science, doesn't create engineering, it doesn't create any of these things. They have their own what's the word? Their own path to the future that's independent generally of policy. And I think it's hard to know when there's going to be some kind of a scientific breakthrough and how fast that's going to go and how fast that's going to happen. So I think sometimes policy can lead the market, and sometimes the market and science leads policy. Is it right for policy to try to think ahead? God, yes, it is. Is it always possible? I don't think so.
There is a fundamental difference here with the technology, though, that I find concerning. So if we look at technological advancements, computing, internet, you know, most things in technology have been driven by joint kind of university and, you know, in research, academic, other types of research, and commercial interests. Autonomous vehicles now, the vast majority of work that's being, you know, a huge amount of work that's being in capital expenditure that's being done by the auto manufacturers, you know, a lot of that stuff's not being published. It's very hard to get a hold of that data. It's much more closed than anything that I can think of, at least. I'm not saying it's the only thing, but most technology development in the past has not had kind of so much of a cloistered development where much of what's happening isn't getting out there and isn't being done as a collaboration. I find that a little concerning.
Why do you think that's happening?
Because it's being driven by, you know, there's so much market potential for these OEMs and these companies that are trying to get ahead of other companies. And I mean, there's definitely, obviously stuff happening in research, and there are collaborations with car companies, but it's way less than most other types of collaborations because the car companies don't want us to get what they're doing, get out there. So, company X suddenly, something they've been putting billions of dollars in is now out in a publication somewhere.
Right. I mean, we're looking at a lot of proprietary information that's being held, but this leads right into what we were just talking about. One of the questions I had is, do we think the industry at all is addressing accessibility, disabilities as they move forward? Has anyone seen any indications that they are?
What industry?
Just the autonomous vehicle industry, let's just say the automotive industry in general, although that's hard to say because, Google and Apple and everybody's also involved in this now. So,
Yeah, I can't, this is Eric. I can't answer the question of what the industry is doing, but I know the United States Access Board got a major campaign to involve people in how autonomous vehicles will be accessible, what is needed. And there's a series running right now where they are looking at the technology for communication, the technology for safety and accessibility to enter and use the vehicle, which is being driven by people with disabilities. So that's a major breakthrough from my point. They're trying to get ahead of the industry and say, because they're a rulemaking agency, they could say public vehicles have to meet this standard, and then California will have to adopt it, and then everyone else will have to adopt it or whatever. But yeah, I think there's a lot of thought being given aside from just the economics of selling the vehicles.
I mean, mechanisms like the DOT's Inclusive Design Challenge
Right.
that came out that are really pushing, a connection of industry and researchers and having these people work together. I think that's really forward thinking because it's trying to preemptively say, hey, how can we get some of these stakeholders together, work together, and kind of come up with solutions that can be trickled into future design.
and I think there's going to be a lot of human and I think you've all hit on this, but there's going to be a lot more human involvement than my opinion that I think the industry is aware of, just based on the conversations that we've had. It's almost a shocking concept that, oh, what do you mean there'll be a blind guy in the car? I don't
Well, they're not thinking about humans. I mean, I forget, Paul just showed me a stat. It's like 90% of research is on engineering, and I think 8 or 3% right now is on human factors. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if those numbers are exactly right, but obviously it's a bias because obviously you want these things to stay on the road and not hit things. But human factors in general has not been the focus. So the aspect of accessibility certainly is low on consideration pools.
You would think when you talk about accessibility that the manufacturers would be, when new technology comes in, one of the early stages is you have these early adopters, right? Those are the people that are going to purchase and use first, and then they're going to tell their friends about it, and the market grows. But you would think the industry would be talking, it sounds like they are, with folks about accessibility, because they're potentially early adopters, and I don't know what kind of market share they'll have. I don't understand the whole economics. The professor of economics is below me in the screen. I see him now, but you think that would be, there'd be a serious conversation going on because they are potentially the early adopters, the people that right now can't get from point A to point B.
Let me comment. It's not just the vehicle manufacturers or in a larger sense. It's also the built environment. Again, a piece of jargon. Our cities and our towns, the sidewalks, the access, the accessibility. More generally, these are bigger questions about design, roadway design, and accessibility that go far beyond vehicles. So I'm at the University of Maine, so of course I believe in research, but this really do need to get ahead on this. This is high priority for research to know how these things are we want them to work.
We had earlier, it floated by me, but we had a question, economic question about gasoline shortages as we increase electric in autonomous vehicles and how we're going to address that. And it floated by me earlier, but I thought, well, Jonathan, while you're up, there you go.
Well,
We financially going to address that.
that's an interesting question. What is the minimum density of gasoline stations that you would need to satisfy the residual demand for the vehicles that are remaining to be internal combustion engines? I wouldn't hazard a guess. I'm not going to hazard a guess off the top of my head, but clearly, I think people may disagree with me. I don't think we're going to lose internal combustion engines because I think people are going to want to use their vintage cars, the cars they grew up with, for all sorts of emotional reasons. I think they're going to stick around probably forever. How those get fueled, what type of infrastructure that looks like, I don't know. I do note that currently, for instance, the closest parallel I can think of is there's some availability in Maine of zero ethanol gasoline. Most gasoline in the country and in Maine, 98% is mixed with 10% ethanol. But for some people who really don't want ethanol in their vehicles, some stations do have ethanol-free gasoline at a price premium of about 40%. So I think the answer is that at the right price, that infrastructure will remain, but I would expect it to get more expensive as the density of stations thins out.
What a great economic answer right there. I
Yeah,
love
right.
it.
Sound like an economist.
Yeah, it's just like that. So I'm going to ask a question of all of you, and I just want your best guess. And I realize it's not a thing, but the biggest questions that are floating by have everything to do with when. When will we have autonomous vehicles common on the road? And I'm just a round table. I'm looking for people for a rough guess based on what you've heard or what you've seen. When do you folks?
I'll
Anybody?
go. I'll go first if you don't
Go ahead,
mind.
Dale.
I actually have the answers, so the rest of the
Oh, well, then
panelists
we're
won't
done.
have-
Go ahead, Dale.
Actually, I was looking at an article today, and it's Bain and Company. I think it's European. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, but I said it on panel. And they're talking about first of all, electric vehicles reaching a turning point, and that's 2024. And the reason why they're starting with electric vehicles is it seems like, at least in this article, that the manufacturers are focusing more R&D on electrification first, and building these strategic partnerships with the technology companies, and the momentum from that electric vehicle, which they're anticipating some explosion of sales in the market in 2024 for the electric vehicles. And they're saying autonomous vehicles will gain momentum in 2028. Now, what that means, I'm not sure. And again, it's just one article, but when I saw this, it was like, well, that's coming sooner than I expected. And I think it's looking at technology maturity more than anything, but at least in this article, they're saying within the next 10 years, we could start seeing a lot of these autonomous vehicles.
All right, Dale's bid is 10 years. Anybody got anything better?
I mean, it depends what you mean by on the road.
When can you get into one?
Well, as I just said in a Forbes article that I probably shouldn't have, legally or not. I mean, I think in 5 years there will be some level of more than just very small test bed autonomous vehicles. No, I'm not saying everywhere. I'm saying that will be possible, and I think within a dozen years they will be much more robustly on the road. The question is how they connect with legacy manual-driven vehicles, and I don't know that answer. But
That's true.
an
Legally, it's a tough one.
an optimistic view, but that's what I'm going.
Legally is a tough one because didn't Waymo just invite us out to give a ride in there? So yeah, I guess we.
Yeah, and I'll drive their thing wherever they let me drive.
Yeah, wherever they want it. Anyone else got a guess here?
I concur with Nick, but let me see if I can put some boundaries on it. In particular, what's again some more jargon called geofencing. in urban city centers,
For spatial
Wait.
jargon though, Jonathan, we like that.
sorry, where urban city centers where the you have created 3D imagery of the roadway and crosswalks and other things to be paying attention to. Those will probably be 5 years, 6 years. It's going to be limited, and they're going to be, the vehicles range are going to be limited to those defined areas. Those will expand as the more areas get mapped and or the vehicles can work without high speed cellular or radio transmissions. So 5 and geofenced, and then it just depends upon the build out, I think, of the technology. It's hard to know beyond that.
That's a good point. That the broadband availability will have something to do with where these vehicles can go safely.
Absolutely. There's some disagreement in the industry about whether or not vehicles actually have to have low latency connectivity, or whether or not they'll have enough onboard computing power. There's a bit that still has to shake out. But I fall, for arbitrary reasons, on the needing the Wi-Fi or the high-speed radio connectivity for system optimization and traffic smoothing, all those other benefits. So I think you will need it, but some claim perhaps not.
Has anyone tried doing computer vision on local machines with no cloud backup on something like a phone or something? It just doesn't work well.
I'm glad Eric brought up the broadband issue because, one point I want to bring up is, infrastructure difference between urban and rural, which we talked about a little bit earlier. And if that level of connectivity isn't in the rural communities, whatever is needed for these vehicles, then there's certainly some infrastructure investment, whether it's transportation or communication that needs to occur. And I suspect we're a lot better off in the urban areas, and that we definitely would see more vehicles in the urban areas before.
I also think the answer depends on Eric's initial question, or a point earlier, which is what's the business case here?
Yeah.
Where is the money in these vehicles and the deployment in the vehicles? And I don't have enough insight on that answer, but I do think the timing is in part dependent upon how the markets look.
Who is working on that? Where is that being investigated?
I think this goes to Rick's point about a lot of closely held trade secrets.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of proprietary information happening here that's not being released yet. And as Nick brought up, I think there's a lot of, this is a multi-trillion-dollar industry. So I think there's a lot of stuff being held very, very close. So for everyone watching, this is purely speculation. We still don't have the actual math yet of when this is why it's so hard to answer the question. And I know a lot of people have asked tonight and earlier this week. It's really hard to answer the question as to when, as you just heard from people, there are so many multiple factors that could adjust, when this could happen or how it can happen.
But with such a broad range, that's what I find interesting. You'll talk to people that are experts that say, yeah, this will happen within 2 years. And other people say, we're talking 40, 50 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
But isn't everybody agreeing that it will happen at some point?
Yeah, I don't think anyone's disagreeing with that. From what I'm hearing, the statistics are basically saying that our accident rates go down to, less than 1%, in the utopian level 5 fully autonomy, and we get all the manual cars off the road. I think in that state, which I'm starting to agree with Jonathan's probably not going to happen anytime soon. But yeah, I think everyone agrees it's going to happen. Let me ask a question. Let me see. I got a couple. What are we going to do to convince people who are unsure about autonomous vehicles? And I think this is an interesting question because we're in the midst of convincing people to get a vaccine. So I'm wondering what we can learn by that to transpose to autonomous vehicles. Yeah, I got that right. Yeah, I was just reading the question right. Anybody got any ideas how we're going to convince people to ride in autonomous vehicles?
Well, you have to make them virus-free. You ride in our Ford AV and you will never catch a disease.
Yeah. It's COVID free. That's how we get them in there.
We have a colleague that studies this. She'll be happy to hear it.
I think this, yeah, this would be,
Is Caitlin here? Yeah.
Yeah, Caitlin, this was a great, we needed Caitlin for this one. The question I had here is about, is autonomous vehicles going to affect tourism in any way? There seems to be some concern that more people will be coming into the state. Anybody have any evidence or thoughts on that?
I had kind of a vision and a thought, but tourism is one of our biggest, attractions and economies in Maine, and you would think that people would welcome the idea of flying in or taking a train to Maine someplace and maybe going to Bangor and then having the ability to get on an autonomous bus of some sort to travel to Acadia. I don't know if some of these tourist destinations can handle more people, but certainly I think there's an appeal there that vacation land, might be even a better place with some of these autonomous vehicles out there. And you think about mid-coast Maine and some of those areas that we do have a fair amount of congestion in the summertime, and maybe there's an opportunity there to enhance the visitors, what they see, to enhance their stay here in Maine.
Autonomous vehicles making Route 1 more efficient.
So let me answer this question with an analogy, or not an analogy. I think what's going to happen here. We began this hour about, you asked about, are the autonomous vehicles going to be electric? Yeah. And so I think that they probably will be, not exclusively, but largely. And so the question then is, what is the state of our electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and how does that work for tourism? And so Efficiency Maine has been prioritizing high-speed chargers up the Route 95, and they're prioritizing level 2 chargers in areas that have high visitor rates and serve both the populations of residents as well as tourists. So I think that it is, the answer is, I think it could well be very beneficial to tourism, but it also depends on the way we roll out our electric vehicle infrastructure more generally. That's my 2 cents.
Sounds good to me. As we're kind of wrapping up the hour, is there a point or a subject matter that we didn't cover that somebody wanted to bring up, or a discussion point or anything like that? Is this oh my gosh, this is a no? This is scary. So my question is this, and I guess my last question comes on, and it does deal with more of this trust in AV. And I've been thinking about this, and Catherine's point earlier, be it that cars today are more like a status symbol, or like this is a thing to achieve and move forward with. In knowing that it seems that a lot of these vehicles are going to move and be more this ride sharing model that we're becoming familiar with. How hard is it going to be to switching people to this Netflix pay monthly model versus, you buy the car and it's yours? And I'm thinking this more of, we've kind of covered this, but I'm wondering how difficult this switch is really going to be, especially among, say, seniors or older adults, as we're now, as I've been corrected to be saying. So, anybody want to take a shot?
Well, I think it's going to depend a lot on population density. Just as mass transportation now depends on population density, but going back to what I said before about how important mobility is to people. You know, if you live in China, Maine, the chances that someone's going to want to be going in the direction you're going when you want to go, and your ride purpose is such that you feel like being in a shared space with someone else, those chances are microscopic. But the chances that you could get into a vehicle with someone else for, say, a different purpose, say, go shopping, and the population is dense, and there's a very good chance that a vehicle is going to be going by at the time you want to travel and in the direction in which you want to travel, then that's going to be convenient enough for you to be interested in mobility as a service. So there's just, those are the kinds of factors. In the research I've done, the factors are how long you have to wait for it to come, how much you have to pay, whether or not it comes to your door, how often it comes, and the purpose of your ride. People have different feelings about sharing rides based on the purpose. If you're on your way to chemotherapy, I guarantee you want to travel by yourself. Guarantee.
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah.
there's all these different factors involved in how people choose to be mobile, and, you know, to put them all together and think you can generalize them is, it's not going to be very effective, I think, in my opinion. Not going to be very effective.
I agree. Well, thank you for that. Thank you, all of you, for taking your time this evening to answer these questions. Thank you, the folks on YouTube Live, for watching and asking the questions that came through. And I hope we answer at least most of them as they floated by. And yeah, I look forward to hanging out in an autonomous vehicle with you all soon, hopefully once we get COVID over with. But yeah. Thank you all. Have a good night and take care.
Thanks
Bye.
much.
Right.
Bye, everybody.
See you later.